excessive growth of power of president and presidential office in decision-making process in the country.
Let's wait and see. Brexit is a quite big benefit. There are still people who think Ukraine is part of Russia.
Have you ever faced the gender biases?
Yes, I always have. My entire career. I'm not listening to that. I know what it is I want and I'm going to work towards it.
Let's continue the topic of parliamentarism. On October 7th, Dmytro Razumkov was dismissed from his speaker's position in a violation of procedures and regulations. Unfortunately, his successor, Ruslan Stefanchuk, is believed to be more loyal to president, to presidential office, to his whole team. Do you share the concerns of Ukrainians about the excessive growth of power of president and presidential office in decision-making process in the country?
So it's a good question, and it's good to be asked the question because it plays its part among the whole public discourse that goes on, right, about the role of Parliament and the role of the president, the institution, if you like, of the office of the president in the Constitution. The thing that is really great about that debate is that it does show, and I go back to I'm always amazed by how much Ukrainians think about this, how engaged they are, how strongly they feel about it, and so you should, because for Ukrainians the balance of the checks and balances that keep, if you like, that balance of decision-making power between Parliament and President, it's quite delicate. And so you need a live conversation that checks this, and for me what was going on in Parliament last week, that was a piece of that. And you can take a view on one side or the other about whether it shifts the balance. My personal view about the changes in personnel are that the G7 group always had a very good working relationship with Speaker Razumkov, and we expect to have a good working relationship with Speaker Stefanchuk. And I believe that anybody who's put into a new job should be given the benefit of the doubt in terms of let's wait and see, you know, how this plays itself out. But actually the most important thing is that under the terms of the Ukrainian constitution, you're the ones who get to decide. And, you know, you exercise your right to decide when it comes to voting for your parliamentarians and voting for your president. So let's see for you in coming weeks how this balance continues as Stefanchuk goes about his job.
Thank you for your opinion. Now let's slightly move to another interesting topic, which is the topic of economic relations. Some skeptics believe that Brexit could negatively affect the bilateral relations in terms of economic relations between Ukraine and the United Kingdom. But what we see now is that the United Kingdom does not want to distance itself from Ukraine and from the bilateral economic relations. So how could you please summarize the post-Brexit era in terms of the improvement of bilateral economic relations between the two countries, between the two states?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing is it was always a mistake to think that the reason why the Brits wanted to leave the EU is because they didn't want to be part of Europe anymore. Because that was the underlining sort of question around the point that you've just made, that this would affect relations between UK and Ukraine. It was never going to affect relations between UK and Ukraine, which were already strong, because what was going on when we left the EU was that the majority of Brits had decided that our future was best determined outside the European Union, not Europe, the European Union, than inside it. Other countries that may still want to join this, ally countries, it's our job to support you on that route. That's why, you know, I speak and act so consistently in favour of European integration as well as Euro-Atlantic integration. But as for our economic relations, it is without a doubt true that if you're outside the EU, of course we could determine our own trade deal, right? Now we're not bound by the terms of the EU. Ukraine is a huge agricultural country with huge potential for that production, among other sectors. And it's one of the things that outside the EU we can negotiate for a stronger relationship over. So in economic terms, Brexit is a quite big benefit in terms of us being able to set those terms and have higher levels of ambition. On political, though, there was never going to be any change, and there isn't a change. The only way this has gone is stronger, and stronger because historically that relationship has been there and has always been defined by an agility in the relationship, whereby as the conflict, for example, has progressed or governance reforms have shifted things, we too have shifted our support so that it remains current. That would have happened whether we were inside the EU or outside.
Thank you. Recently I've conducted a study on how foreigners Google search Ukraine.
Oh boy.
And you know,
probably
the
guess.
results were surprising because they mostly do not Google topics related to investment climate, conditions of doing business in Ukraine, promising industries, and so on and so forth. We Ukrainians make a mistake sometimes thinking that the world is Ukrainian-centric. It's not.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not. And we, together with Polina, working in other projects apart from Kyiv, not Kiev, we also try to focus our work on promoting the image of Ukraine abroad. So could you please give us an advice? What shall we do to interest foreigners in economic potential of Ukraine? For example, how can we interest the British to see Ukraine as the destination for their business?
I think, first of all, that there is very little that Ukraine can do about the perceptions that both investors and actually people generally have of Ukraine. There is to a degree things that you can correct. For example, a sort of fairly high number of people in the UK who have never been to Ukraine and frankly never been to Eastern Europe tend not to have realised that Ukraine is no longer part of the Soviet Union. There are still people who think Ukraine is part of Russia, and if you showed them a map and asked them to find Ukraine, they won't be able to do it. Those who know a bit more about Ukraine tend to think about the very things that I think Ukraine is trying to move away from to define itself more positively. So essentially corruption and war. And no country wants to be defined by their problems. They want to be defined by their opportunities. But my feeling is that effort is probably wasted trying to do away with the corruption and war kind of memes, if you like. I think effort is better put into highlighting the positives. And here I do see signs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs doing this, by the way. They've done some really innovative work, both to show the beauty and the diversity of the country, but also where Ukraine is doing really well. In sport, Paralympic sport is quite extraordinary, by the way, but in sport generally. Oh, and by the way, 3 women referees who were refereeing the England-Andorra match. Incredible, right? If you're trying to project a modern democratic Ukraine, an all-women football referee team, there is no better ambassador message. It's more of those. It's those sorts of things that are highly visual, that when people think about ideas and concepts on an international level and they see Ukraine in there, then slowly but surely, subconsciously, Ukraine just naturally takes its place alongside them. So no underestimating Ukraine's position in world football right now, seriously, and particularly for the Brits, whom, as you know, football is just kind of an endless passion. In the field of investment then, if you get beyond the people thinking that actually Ukraine is a country you can really think about building a relationship with, then we come back to the same issues. There isn't a business person alive who hasn't said to me, A, Ukraine has fantastic potential in, and it really doesn't matter the sector, there are so many sectors in this sector. B, I'm not investing until I know that the rule of law has my back. It really just comes down to these things. Ukraine has got to show that it has got over the hump of really tough, large-scale judicial reform that tells investors, because investors will live with a certain degree of bureaucracy, and they will live with a certain degree of uncertainty, and they will live with a certain amount of mess. I mean, they have operated in messy countries elsewhere in the world. What they will not do is come in knowing that within 3 months the Anti-Monopolies Commission will slap them with a fine which is unjustified, and then double it when they haven't turned up to court to pay it because the court case has deliberately prolonged itself. No one's interested in that. And this, I'm afraid, there is still some way to go. So this, alongside the NATO question you asked me about defence reform, it goes the same for investment. There are no shortcuts here. Judicial reform has to happen from the top down to the bottom. And when investors see real signs of that, and real signs means because they talk to each other, business people talk to each other, that even when something does happen that is bad, something goes amiss, somebody else gets a fine, they see it being resolved, or they see them having their case heard fairly in court, that is when they will begin to come to this country in real enough numbers.
Thank you. We should do something with that.
Yeah.
We will definitely
And we will do. Boris Johnson has recently said that by 2025 the UK will completely switch to the green energy.
2035.
2035. Okay, I'm sorry.
Gosh,
So
2025 would be really scary. That's like 3 years, 4 years.
I think there are some gradual
Yeah, there
steps
is.
Structural
already.
changes.
Yeah.
35. Yeah.
So does the UK have any plans in joint projects in terms of green energy with Ukraine?
So we do, actually, as we do with many countries, but including with Ukraine. I think we see great potential in Ukraine for investment in green energy. There is a UK company that is already the biggest investor in green energy specifically. They own more solar farms than anywhere else in the world. They give quite a lot of advice here. Everybody thinks that there is quite... Ukraine is one of the potential destination countries for green hydrogen, so cleanly produced hydrogen, although I still think that's some years away in terms of being able to produce it at scale. But pilot projects for that are already in operation. So the answer is yes. And of course we have to, because our nationally determined contribution in terms of going net zero is 78% by 2035, which is enormous. That's just huge. Even as I sit here, I can see the scale of the challenge for the UK. And you can only get there to a point where you're net zero in terms of offsetting your emissions by use of clean energy, tree planting, etc., through multiple partnerships. This is just not something the UK can do on its own. So they'll be looking to countries like Ukraine, which is, as we've just discussed, huge potential place. If that investment in green energy can be sped up, then the UK can potentially be one of the biggest partners of green energy here. But it's going to take time. What I do know is, because I probably have more conversations about green investment here than I do about anything else, partly of course because we're chairing COP26 next month, and because I know that both the Prime Minister and the President are deeply interested in Ukraine playing a proper role there. I know that this is budgeted for, that there has been a keen conversation here between energy, environment, finance ministers and the Office of the President. So I'm optimistic actually that at least politically I can see a way through. Judicial reform though, for new businesses who want to invest in green energy.
Yeah. I wanted to say about this kind of Google search investigation I conducted. Most of the energy-related requests were from Great Britain.
Yeah.
So that's the most visible result.
Yeah,
that
and I
received.
can understand why, partly because of that huge target, but partly because we are a world leader on wind farming, for example, which is something we want to export. We are one of the most interested and biggest investors in solar, but also because the scale of that commitment and the messaging from the Prime Minister means more and more are looking to investments overseas to make that target happen. But that's good to know though, actually. Thank you.
Let's talk about gender equality.
Yes,
Or
let's talk
gender
about
inequality. We know that the inequality is not a problem of some separate part of economic, political or public life. No, it is everywhere. The underrepresentation of women is basically everywhere, in politics, in business, in management, in STEM professions and specialties, in diplomacy, by the way, because as far as I know, only 8% of Ukrainian female diplomats are represented abroad. In Britain, I know this amount is bigger, at about 30%.
Globally, it's just over 30%.
Globally, female diplomats abroad.
So heads of ambassadors, over a third, yeah. And in Africa, just over half, actually. So we've made quite a lot of progress. But you're right, Ukraine has quite a long way to go.
So have you ever faced the gender biases in your career? And what is the healthy reaction of an individual and of the whole society to such precedents?
Well, so the answer to your first question is yes, I always have, my entire career. And I've worked in industry, I've worked for an NGO, I've worked for 3 government departments, now an ambassador, and in every single one of those jobs, I've faced gender bias. So, and my response often to it has been to ignore it and do things that everyone else does, to network, to build my contacts, to aim for the thing that I want to be and do what everyone else does. Because for me, 95% of the battle on an individual level, so if it's just me or it's just you, is about just having the confidence, is about not letting that messaging or the actions of other people make you feel that you're less worthy than, say, a male candidate for the job, which, quite frankly, many young women do. That's what that messaging does to them. So that has to be taken away, right? The sense that STEM subjects are not for girls, or, you know, management positions can only go to people who don't have children, or these are all things that still persist, right? So there's a thing there just about you, the individual, saying I'm not listening to that. I know what it is I want, and I'm going to work towards it, and that's very powerful. But I think that it also needs a constant, more general messaging and modelling of the quite obvious common sense that an economy grows faster and peace processes succeed more and governance is more successful and your democracy flourishes when 100% of your country has access to it and not 50%. This seems like such a screamingly obvious statistic to me that I can't even believe we have to say it. But apparently we have to say it quite a few times. So for me, I believe that one of my jobs here as a female ambassador is to be doing that, is to both model that I'm one of those people who has grown that career and I'm interested in making it possible for others to do the same, but also be talking. I raise this every single time I meet a minister, literally every single time, and not in a technical way, as some ambassadors do, and it's right for them to do it. Is your budgeting gender sensitive, for example? I think that's great that they do that. I tend not to want to talk in those terms. I think it turns people off. I tend to ask them, in your staff, how many women do you have, given that last year when I spoke at the Kiev School of International Relations, 60% of their students appear to be women, how many of those have made their way into your diplomatic programme? And make it as specific as possible. But I'm often asked questions by women here about my career, and some of their questions I'm astonished by. They expose such a deep-seated prejudice about women, somehow getting too much power, or coming out of the kitchen and doing things that, frankly, leave spaces in the family home that many men are not quite ready to do. It exposes that in the worst way. And so it feels to me like the third thing that needs to happen here that there still isn't enough of is mentoring, is the nurturing of people, where you really get into their lives and you sit and talk about it. I talk about mine, they talk about theirs. We compare and build confidence in the context of their everyday lives, that this is something that you can craft, even as people around you may not think that this is the right thing for women in general to do. You can show them that it's possible. I mean, one of the women at this breakfast this morning was the first woman, Dmytro, and we asked her, what did your family think? I mean, what did your family think? You're not even talking about going into business, you're talking about going into a minefield and deactivating mines. I mean, I can't think of anything more dangerous, quite frankly. And what was she doing before she decided to be a Dmytro? She was a wife and mother. It's not like she had a career. She was at home looking after her family, and then war broke out and she decided this was something she wanted to do. And what did her brother say when she said she wanted to do this? He thought it was incredible. He thought it was fantastic. Some of your family may surprise you. Maybe it just takes you to step up and say that this is something that you want to do. Maybe you define yourself when you don't make those choices, and that all it needs is for you to help other people to open their eyes to you. So the role modelling and the mentoring that comes with it, I think, is something that's really needed here.
Thank you. Two short questions from me. Do you see any progress for 2 years in combating gender inequality in Ukraine? For these 2 years that you're in Kiev? Or is it just happening in Kiev, not in the regions? What do you think?
It's everywhere. I mean, I think
maybe
it's
some
everywhere.
encouraging initiatives they're working now in Ukraine that will make you positive about the future of bringing balance to the gender-related issues.
There are, and I've seen them everywhere, including, by the way, when I've been travelling in the East. When I've gone to, so I went to, where was it? Might have been to Shastia or Zolote, I can't remember which one it was, where we were invited to meet the community. Who do you think turned out? I mean, all the school mums were there with their technical recommendations for how you were going to repair the road so that they could drop their kids off safely at school and then go off and trade. I mean, they knew exactly what needed doing, but also no one was going to stop them from coming out and telling us about their communities. And it was being enabled, organised for them to do that. And I've seen that, frankly, all over the country. I also meet many people like you who have, created startups and had ideas and have not let any of this stop you building what you need to build. What I think is interesting is that Ukraine is a bit at the stage where the more of that there is, the more nervous it makes many men, which is why you keep hearing so much of this misogyny. And if I'm honest, I get that myself on social media for the same reason, right? This build to 30% of UK diplomats, that's a relatively recent thing. We've got up to 30% only in about the last 5 years, which means that occasionally people are still slightly surprised that I have this job. And there are social media for it in which I talk specifically about my experience as a woman ambassador. And sometimes I can't tell you, it really upsets people, men, it really upsets men when I talk about the power that you have as a woman ambassador and how I experience that. So I think that's part of the same thing, that when it's new, it looks new, it can create real support from people, but it can also create fear. And it's the fear that leads quite often to that commentary. It's designed to make you feel like, actually, this is something you shouldn't be doing. Mm-hmm. The good news is, for someone like me, that when someone tells me this is something I shouldn't be doing, I tend to do even more of it.
Great rule. And the very last question, what should the listeners and viewers of Kyiv Not Kyiv keep in mind after they see the interview with you as the ambassador of the UK to Ukraine?
Oh, well, I suppose the biggest thing for me actually is our last point here. You know, we started with a characterization of Ukrainians as very determined people. Mm-hmm. In particular, Ukrainian women are very determined people. If people take one thing away, it's that I met 5 people this morning. I'm now being interviewed by 2 of you. For those 5 that I met this morning, there'll be another 5,000. And for the 2 of you who are growing this career and making these choices, there'll be another 2 million. All that untapped potential out here is such a source of energy and opportunity for people who watch this interview. They can go away wherever they are in their lives. They look around and they'll be seeing some of these women. Bring them in. That's what I think.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for this conversation. I'm truly inspired by it.
Thank you. Lovely to speak with you both.
I even don't know what to say.
We have to finish somehow the episode.
We should say, unfortunately, our interview is coming to an end. Thank you very much for this time and for your words. That's just very inspiring for me personally. These were Polina Bachuk and Tetiana Haiduk.
And Her Excellency, Madam Ambassador Melinda Simmons. Thank you very much for the conversation again. We both stay safe, stay kind. Remember, it's Kyiv, not Kiev. Stay tuned and see you soon.
From Ukraine with love. Thank you.
Silly thing we do.